We continue now at the top of Daf Zayin Amud Aleph Meseches Avoda Zara. This is Avoda Zara Daf 7a. On the previous Amud, Rav Huna said that the halacha is like Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha and the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha said that when it comes to collecting a debt from an Oved Kochavim before his holiday, so if it's a milva al peh, you're allowed to collect the debt because you don't have a shtar. We're afraid you won't be able to collect it later. But when it comes to a milva b'shtar, if the person has a document, if the Jewish person has a document, then he should not collect it right before the holiday because again, we're afraid that the Oved Kochavim is going to thank his Avoda Zara. He's going to be moded to his Avoda Zara on the holiday because he was able to pay off the debt. So when it comes to the milva b'shtar, since you'll be able to collect it later, you should collect it later. And again, Rav Huna is saying the halacha is like that. The halacha is like Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha, that we make that distinction between a milva al peh and a milva b'shtar. And Rav Huna also says that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda in the following case. The case is that a person gave wool to a dyer and he dyed it the wrong color. So what do we say happens in that situation? It's a machlokas tanoim. Rabbi Meir says no sein lo demei tzmar. Rabbi Meir says that the person who took the wool to dye it, he's essentially acquired it through a shinoi, through that physical change, and therefore he should just pay for the wool. He now owns the wool. It would be like stealing something, and then there's a shinoi, there's some kind of physical change that he does to the object that he steals, so we say shinoi kone. We say that the person who stole has now acquired it, and he owes the money, and so over here also, the person who dyed it the wrong color, he should pay for the value of the wool. He gives that to the person who owned the wool, and now he acquires the wool. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, he doesn't acquire the wool. Rather, the person who gave it to the person to dye, he's able to take the wool back, and he has to pay for the benefit, but he always pays the lower amount. If the amount of improvement is more than what was spent, so no sin lo he only needs to pay the dyer what was spent. And let's say what was spent was more than the improvement in terms of how much it improved in value because it was dyed. So no sin lo he always gives the lesser amount. He gives just the value of the improvement because again it was dyed the wrong color. So the person who's getting back his wool always gives the lesser amount. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. And again we're saying the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Now when Rav Yosef heard this, Ahadrinu Rav Yosef liape, Rav Yosef, he turned around, he turned his face. The idea is that essentially he was dissatisfied with this statement. Why? Because Bishlama halacha Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. I understand saying that the halacha is like Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. That's already a chiddush. It's necessary to say that. So one might have thought, Yachid v'ravim halacha karavim, that when you have a minority against a majority, the halacha follows the majority. Kamash malon halacha ki yachid. So it's coming to teach us the halacha is like Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha, the halacha is like the minority. El halacha Rabbi Yehuda, but to say the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, lamali, why do you even need to say that? Pshita, it's obvious. The machlokas v'achar kach stam, hilchasuk stam. This is a situation where you have a machlokas and then a stam mishnah. And the general rule is that when you have a machlokas v'achar kach stam, the halacha is like the unattributed mishnah. The halacha is like the stam. And the Gemara continues and explains machlokas b'bava kama. There's a machlokas on this issue in bava kama. Ustam b'bava mitzia, and then we have a stam mishnah in bava mitzia, which says what the halacha is. The Tanan, as we learned in the mishnah in bava mitzia, it says kol hamishan. If anyone changes, if anyone deviates, yado al atachtona, his hand, he has the lower hand, and that's exactly what's happening over here. We're saying that he just has to pay the lesser amount. V'chol hachozer bo, anyone who retracts, yado al atachtona, again he has the lower hand, and so again you see it's a machlokas v'achar kach stam, and therefore of course that's what the halacha is. And so the Gemara says Rav Huna. Now Rav Huna, why did he feel the need to say this? Mishum de'ein seder lemishnah, because there's no order to the mishnah. You don't know which one was first. Teikol meimar stam tana bereisha v'achar kach machlokas. Maybe really the stam mishnah was first, and then came the machlokas. But the Gemara says Ihachi, if so, if that's the case, kol machlokas v'achar kach stam. Anytime you have a machlokas and then a stam mishnah, leima ein seder lemishnah, we can make that argument that there's no proper order to the mishnah. But the Gemara says it's not true. You can't make that argument all the time because Rav Huna will respond. Kilo amrina ein seder b'chad Mesechta. When do we not say that there's no order to the mishnah? That's in one Mesechta, meaning then we rely on the order. But betray Mesechta amrina. But when it comes to two separate Mesechtas, then we do say ein seder lemishnah. We say there's no particular order, and that's when we would not apply the rule of machlokas v'achar kach stam. Rav Yosef. Now, why doesn't Rav Yosef accept that argument? Because kula nezikin chad Mesechta. According to Rav Yosef, the whole nezikin is considered to be like one Mesechta. And the Gemara continues, Viba Yisayim, if you want, I could say another reason why Rav Yosef thinks it's obvious that this is the halacha, Mishum dekatani lagavi hilchas absikta, because this line is taught where we're giving halachic rulings, meaning final halachic rulings, where it says, Kala meshani yadu ala tachton, anyone who deviates, he has the lower hand, V'chol hachozer bo yadu ala tachton, and anyone who retracts, again, he has the lower hand. And Rashi explains, Machlokas Rabbi Meir of Rabbi Yehuda, again we're saying it's a Machlokas v'achar kach stam. Now in the previous summit it said Ditanya, we learned in a Brisa, but we saw the Mesoros Hashas in the previous summit changes it to Ditnan, because it actually is a Mishnah, the Machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Where is that? It's B'hagozel b'bavakam, it's in Hagozel and Bavakama, v'achar kach sosam lontana b'bav Metzia, but then we have a Stam Mishnah in Bav Metzia, Kir Rabbi Yehuda, that follows Rabbi Yehuda. V'chol Machlokas shenechliku tanoim v'achar kach stam, anytime you have a situation of a Machlokas Tanoim followed by a Stam Mishnah, Lanu b'Mishnah Seinu ke'echad mehen halacha kemoso. Again, that's to say that the halacha is like that opinion. To cave into sos me'achar machlokas, since Rebbe he made a Stam Mishnah, an unattributed Mishnah right after the machlokas or after the machlokas. Shma minad dekamu rabbanan b'tamayi. We see that that's what the rabbanan say that's the proper reason. Umistabra taima dehech, and that again that's the logical opinion. Ein seder the Mishnah, and so then the Gemara said, well, there's no order to the Mishnah, so you don't necessarily know that it's a machlokas v'achar kach stam. Siddur d'masis and lav dafka, the order of the Mishnah is lav dafka, it's not necessarily in order. V'shem Mishnah achroni hi nishnas rishon b'beis hamedrash. Maybe the later Mishnah that's found in our Masechet was actually taught first, learned first in the Beis Medrash. And the Gemara says, well, kol machlokas v'achar kach stam nami. You can make that argument anytime there's a machlokas v'achar kach stam. Alama kaimelon kol machlokas v'achar kach stam. Halacha stam. Why would we have a rule that anytime you have a machlokas and then a stam, the halacha is like the stam, if that rule never applies? And then the Gemara said that Rav Huna will respond, when does the rule apply? That's going to be again in one Masechta. Kilo amrin on ein seder. When do we not say ein seder la Mishnah? Meaning, when do we apply the rule of machlokas v'achar kach stam? Because ela samchin on asidr, because we rely on the order. Hani mili v'chad Masechta. That's in one Masechta. And then the Gemara said nezikin kulu tlas abave. By nezikin also one can argue that bava kama, bava metzia, and bava basra, that's all considered to be one Masechta. That's what Rav Yosef argues, and that's why we would say again it should be obvious that we rely on machlokas v'achar kach stam over there. So why did Rav Huna need to say it? And then the Gemara said, if you want, I could say lahachi hadrinu Rav Yosef liape. The reason why Rav Yosef turned his face to inami ein seder la Mishnah, because even if we did say there's no order to the Mishnah, meaning to say even if you couldn't necessarily rely on machlokas v'achar kach stam, lo itzrich lomar halacha Rabbi Yehuda, it's still not necessary to say the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. The vadai hilchasok ki ha'istama, because the halacha certainly follows the Stam Mishnah in Bab Metzia. Because the line of Kol HaMeshana didn't even need to be taught there. We're not talking in that parak about shinoi, about changes. Ela b'chazor, we're talking about retracting. From the fact that that line is even there, that it says Kol HaMeshana yodel atachtona shma mino hilchasa kapasuk v'yazil, you see that the whole point of that Mishnah is to list the final halacha. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Lo yomar adam lechavero, a person should not say to his friend on Shabbos, Hanira shetamod imi lo erev, does it seem that you can stand with me this evening? Meaning he's alluding to the fact that he wants his friend to work with him after Shabbos. You can't even allude to the fact that you're going to do malacha together after Shabbos. You can't speak about that kind of business on Shabbos. But Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, Omer adam lechavero, Hanira shetamod imi lo erev. A person can say that to his friend, since it's just an allusion, it's not a problem. He can say, does it seem that you can stand with me this evening? And Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabba bar bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Hilchasok Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. The halacha is like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Hanishal l'chacham v'timei, lo yishal l'chacham v'yitar. If a person asks a chacham, and the chacham says tamei, he shouldn't go to another chacham, that chacham should say tahar. L'chacham v'yasar, let's say he goes to one chacham, and that chacham forbids it. Lo yishal l'chacham v'yatar, he shouldn't go to a second chacham to ask that it should be mutter. Hayu shnayim, let's say there are two of them. Echad metami v'echad metahar, one of the chachamim says tamei, one says tahar. Or echad oser v'echad mater, let's say one of them says it's aser, it's prohibited, and one of them says it's mutter, it's permitted. If one of them is greater than his friend in wisdom and in numbers, some say that in numbers means in age, halach acharav, you should follow the greater one, v'im lav, and if not, halach achar hamachmer, you should follow the one that's being more strict. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, we make a distinction as follows. Bishel Torah, if it is something from the Torah, if it is a Doraisa, halach achar hamachmer, you should follow the person who is more strict. B'shal sovrim, but if it's something that's derabanan halach achar hamekel, then you follow the one that is more lenient. And Amar Rav Yosef says, Hilchasuk Rav Yoshua ben Karcha, the halacha is like Rav Yoshua ben Karcha. We're bringing these Gemaras because these are cases where the Amoraim are saying that the halacha is like Rav Yoshua ben Karcha. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, V'kulon shechazru behen, all of them, if they have done teshuvah, that's how Rashi understands. Rashi says, V'kulon shechazru agazlonin v'amei ha'aretz kai. We're going on gazlonim. Gazlonim are not allowed to testify. Amei ha'aretz, they're not believed when it comes to taking off maestros. And the question over here in the Bryce is, what if they do teshuvah? Can we accept that? So the Tanakama says again, V'kulon shechazru behen, if they do teshuvah, ein mekavlin osan olamis, we do not accept them forever. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rashi explains, "Ein mekablan osan lahachzikon b'toras chavros lismoch alein." It means we're not going to consider them to be chaverim, colleagues, that we are now going to rely on them. We don't rely on the teshuvah for that issue. And the Brisa continues, Rabbi Yehuda says, Chazru bohen b'matmonios. If they do teshuvah, but it's in a hidden fashion, it's not something that's public, so ein mekablan osan, then we don't accept them. But b'farhesya, but if the way they do teshuvah is publicly, everybody's aware of it, then mekablan osan, then we do accept them. Ika di'amri, there are those that say, a different version of what Rabbi Yehuda said, Asu divreim b'matmonios, if they did what they did wrong in a hidden fashion, then mekablan osan, then we will accept them. And Rashi explains, Asu divreim b'seiser averos she'avru adheina, meaning the averos that they did until now, they did it secretly, they did it privately, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Zayin Amud Beis.